Today's fan sponsor is Goblin Society Games. Be sure to stick around at the end of the video for more information on their D&D products, and thank you to them for making this video possible. Alright, looks like most people want to see the video about writing women next, so I'll start working on that while I watch these new episodes of The Last of Us, which I'd also really like to make a video about one day, but for now I'm just casually watching a TV show and writing a different thing that people specifically asked for instead of something I'm mad about.
What do you call Grizzly's ribs? Barbecue.
God damn it. Hi and welcome back to another one of these videos only 2 weeks after the last one, and it's about something that's not even done airing yet. I finally did it. Don't get used to it. What's that? I'm being told I do need to get used to it, because that is the new upload schedule. Thank you for all your suggestions on the last video. I will be getting to them, but first, I had this thought, completely unrelated to anything I watched recently, of course, but also spoiler warning for everything in The Last of Us. I was thinking about how much information people can naturally infer from a scene, even with minimal or vague dialogue. Let's say you're at a restaurant eating alone because you're cool and secure and that's fine, and you see two people at another table across the room. It's a man and a woman, similar ages but otherwise very different in appearance, and the woman is smiling and looking at the menu while the man is quietly stirring a coffee and not making eye contact. The woman seems to be talking, but the man isn't responding much. Eventually, he says something, and her smile drops. She carefully lowers the menu and listens. He says something else, uncomfortably shifting position and still not looking directly at her. She reaches for his hand across the table, but he pulls it back and speaks into his coffee one more time. She frowns and starts crying. He finally looks up and starts to say something else, but she holds up a hand, stands, and leaves. He stays sitting, doesn't move for a while, and then sighs and takes a sip of his coffee. Even though you've heard nothing they've said, you likely already have a ton of assumptions about their relationship and the conversation they just had. You would most likely guess you'd witnessed a breakup, and not a super mutual one. It could be something else. Maybe they're adopted siblings, and the girl really wanted her brother to try the coffee at this restaurant, and he told her he didn't really like it, and that hurt her feelings. But probably not. We're obviously making assumptions here. We don't know what happened with 100% certainty. But we humans are pretty good at figuring things out by process of elimination, and so based on context clues, we know there's only so many things that could have happened. And that's just broad strokes. You can and do read into a bunch of tiny little details every time you observe people. Things like how they're standing, where they're looking, what they're wearing, how their facial expressions change, and what they choose to say. Talking is just another action, and one of many ways to communicate what someone is thinking and feeling. Because of this, I don't hold fast to the whole show don't tell rule in writing. I think it's a fine criticism, but it doesn't actually help that much as a writing tip, because it sounds like characters who just never talk about what's going on. But dialogue is a perfectly fine way to deliver information to the audience as long as the character would say that thing. Writers get into trouble when they forget the audience isn't actually in the movie, and so no character would choose to say something out loud purely for our benefit. But in my experience, people do explain things to each other. Characters will often naturally be talking about the thing we want to know about because that's what's happening to them, and they also want to know about that thing. For example, if your main character is into a boy at her school and he starts exhibiting traits of being a vampire, it would be weirder if she didn't verbally confront him about that by taking him out into the woods alone and listing off all the strange things he does while he makes an expression like he can't stop smelling every bad smell he ever smelled, and then zooms around and rips off little pieces of trees like a very cool, strong boy.
I'm designed to kill.
Now, could you do that scene differently? No, it has to be exactly like that.
The skin of the killer.
Twilight. Other times, we're being introduced to a concept the characters are already very familiar with, so they have no reason to address those things directly. This is where our ability to just figure it out comes in handy. I think back to when I first played Half-Life 2 a lot, because in that game, they tell you absolutely nothing about what's going on. The characters you're interacting with do not care if you're caught up. They're just like, oh, thank God you're here. Put on the armor and go. We'll explain later. And they don't explain later, but by the end of the game, I know that Gordon Freeman was yanked 2 decades into the future by an interdimensional being to make sure he survived while Earth was brutally attacked and subjugated so that he could come back at just the right moment and save the day. A bit late, considering the aliens have already obliterated society with biological warfare, wiped out the Western Hemisphere, drained the Earth of all its resources, but a resistance has formed out of the remains of the company responsible for this whole mess, and they have lots of guns for you. How do I know all that? I couldn't tell you. I just picked it up along the way. Enough people said enough things about their own lives, and I compared it to what I was looking at, and before long I had a functional understanding of what had gone down. Now, I'd argue They could have been a little more explicit because I was confused for a while, but it still eventually worked, and it never took away from the experience for me. I think there's a lack of trust in audience attention spans these days, and writers fear being misinterpreted for even a moment. So a quick and easy way to feel better about that is to have your character say things like, "As you already know, the president's favorite Tamagotchi was stolen by politically neutral but randomly violent terrorists, and so we're airdropping you into a country that hasn't recently been in the news to retrieve it." You'll be working with your old partner who you had a falling out with for reasons that are serious but also sympathetic. And then that guy comes out and is like, "Well, if it isn't my old partner, Kevin. I haven't seen you since that mission back in 07 when you almost got me killed. I swore I'd never forgive you, and my name is Nick." And then the hero goes, "Hey, as we both already know, I'm a little selfish and addicted to an unspecified pain medication, but at least I'm loyal to the end and never suffer any major consequences of my risk-taking." And then they glare at each other for a few seconds until they both laugh and the tension breaks and they kiss. I'm very familiar with the desire to get your audience up to speed as quickly as possible. It can be paralyzing, and it took me a while to learn that even if someone doesn't know everything you know about your characters, they're gonna be okay. You know what happens after this scene ends? Another one. Usually, characters can be defined over time. Information can be learned slowly, in pieces. Movies actually take place over the course of several hours at a consistent speed. Pacing out the reveal of information is the strength and arguably the purpose of narrative cinema. So if I learn everything right away because your character reads me their Wikipedia article, what am I sticking around for? In Arcane, Silco and Vander allude to a shared past multiple times for the first couple episodes. When Vander sees Silco again, he's more concerned with the violent death of their friend and his own physical vulnerability than discussing the current state of their relationship. But we still understand what's going on, because frankly, we're not that dumb.
We shared a vision, Vander.
Hold on. Do these two guys know each other? At that point in the show, we have not been explicitly told that Silco and Vander are good friends who fought side by side in a revolution, but we still know it about as much as we knew the two people in the restaurant were breaking up. And then later, after Silco has captured Vander, we still get that conversation, because by then it makes sense, and it happens in character. Silco does do some monologuing, but it's not for our sake, he's just kind of that guy. Man, Arcane is good. Too bad we only got the one season. Withholding information is actually a filmmaking tool, and you can use people's incorrect or subjective assumptions to take them on an emotional journey and make a point, or just to be funny.
They're horrible, terrible, so bad, so bad. They're all we have left.
So we're in.
Letting your audiences fill in blanks on their own is not the same thing as dangling mystery in front of their face. It's actually just a more precise use of recontextualization, which I talked about in a past video. For example, you could introduce two close characters who are going through a rough patch and not communicating their feelings, only for one of them to die unexpectedly with that conflict still unresolved. And you could leave the details of the conflict vague because there's no reason these characters who haven't been talking to each other for a while would suddenly need to re-explain their feelings. But it's okay, because that's not important yet. The bond between these two was more powerful than whatever their conflict was, and we learned that when the survivor goes on a guilt-fueled revenge mission. We feel for her loss and her lack of closure, and then you can reveal pieces of that previous conflict over time as they become thematically relevant. The story then is a journey through the grieving process, and it continuously recontextualizes both characters' actions and relationship as the protagonist comes to terms with her own regrets, in theory. And if you helped produce that story as an award-winning video game and were especially proud of yourself for all the brilliant work you didn't personally do but like taking credit for, then I'd expect you to understand those writing techniques well enough to include them when you adapt that story into an HBO series, instead of just spoon-feeding us that information through dialogue that would embarrass a first-year film student. Neil? For the record, I love The Last of Us. I've played both games about 5 times now. The first one is a masterpiece, no notes. The second one, while occasionally a bit messy, has enough of a masterpiece in it to excuse the things that I think could have been done better. Overall, big fan of The Last of Us, not Neil, although this time it might be more Craig's fault. I'm honestly enjoying the new season. I've only seen the first 2 episodes because that's all it exists. There's a new one coming out tomorrow, so hopefully I don't hate it. There's plenty of good things to say, and this isn't a hit piece on the show. In the grand scheme of things, It's still a story I really like. I love seeing more female protagonists and gay relationships in popular media. Jesse is incredible, as he should be, and Bella Ramsey is honestly such a good actor that she saves some of the weaker scenes. I have issues with the addition of the attack on Jackson, but it was at least executed beautifully. One of the criticisms I had of season 1 was that there were not enough zombies in it to make them feel like an actual threat, and that has not been an issue this time. I also absolutely loved the whole sequence inside the grocery store. The girls' interactions were great. The decision to introduce the stalkers early makes a lot of sense, and they do a great job of making it super creepy. Bella Ramsey, again, kills it, really brings the LA energy. Also in the party scene later on, basically everything they've ever reshot from the games is fantastic because those were written well. I thought the first season was fine. I have criticisms, but I'll save those for a future video. What I did like was the dialogue. All the little Joel and Ellie moments felt very organic and in character. They recreated the ones from the game perfectly, and the ones they added fit right in. It was honestly the best part of the show. So did they really think we weren't gonna notice this Netflix teen drama dialogue in season 2 just because they sandwiched it in between good dialogue from the game?
Cat's available.
Why would I ask Kat?
She's the other one. You used to with her.
Right, yes, thank you.
I figured I could at least passively enjoy watching the cosplay of the characters I liked, but instead I got immediately angry and had to start taking notes because I guess this is the way I am now. Right away we get a scene with a bunch of characters who haven't been in the show yet, standing perfectly still in a field and very seriously explaining to each other the mutual tragedy they all just experienced together.
3-day jump on us. We should have gone right after him.
Drove away, Abby, in our only working vehicle.
We were trying to save the wounded. We didn't save anyone.
That wasn't true.
Supposedly what?
Something not true.
That was all super normal. Also, this whole scene looks like they were in the editing room and then suddenly remembered they hadn't shot this part yet, so they had to run out behind the building with a camera. For comparison, we first meet Abby in the game when she wakes up in the ski lodge, and we don't even know who she is. But so much gets communicated through this really simple interaction between her and Owen that it's kind of astonishing how little they actually say. We know from the way she wakes up that she was having a nightmare. We know from the context of this world and the other people laying around her in sleeping bags that she's traveling with a small group and waking up in an unfamiliar place. Everything about her physical appearance, from her build to her braid, communicates information about her priorities. Owen is already awake and standing apart from the others, introducing him as more important, at least for this scene. He asks Abby about her dream and says she was grinding her teeth again, which tells us they're close enough to be familiar with each other's sleeping habits, though their body language implies a less intimate relationship at the moment. Then she notices snow on his coat and asks where he's been because even the characters know how to pick up on context clues. This scene happens in the show too, but not until the second episode and without really indicating anything about Abby or Owen's relationships. They also decided to show us Abby's nightmare where she talks to herself in a really weird way.
Don't go in there. Stop it. I'm telling you, go back. No.
Then for the rest of episode 1, we reestablish our main characters in a bunch of original scenes that take place before the start of the second game. And the difference between these and the game scenes later on is so painful that I can't possibly be the only one to have noticed. For some reason, the writers, who I'm sure aren't computers, think it's very normal human behavior for one person to say something, and then for the other person to completely disregard that and start a totally different conversation, because that happens multiple times.
Bimetallic strip. Too much current runs through, heats up the strip, it bends, releases the lever, circuit breaks.
Can I ask a question?
Shoot.
Why is she angry at you?
Nobody is listening or responding to what the other person says, they just move on to a new thought. In real life, unless you have some strong main character energy, people don't just ignore each other when they're talking. You take cues from each other, you react. The way these scenes are written, it sounds more like a hive mind speaking through several people at once. In the scene that introduces Dina, a well-rounded and competent female character in the games who I think is completely misrepresented in the show, as is tradition, she says the most off-the-wall shit, and Joel brushes past it like it just makes total sense.
The main lines are clay, and our foreman is into foremanning.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I'll be out there in a minute.
Oh yeah, construction talk. I gotcha.
Teach me?
You gotta check if the wires are live, so how do you do that?
Lick them?
What is wrong with you? Did you just come in here to bother this poor man?
So the springs hold the
The
levers?
thing is, I try. I know I'm a hard ass and maybe overprotective.
You can actually see the moments where a natural conversation would start developing, but the writers grab it and force it back in the direction they want it to go in. It can be hard to pick out why this dialogue is so rough sometimes. Like I said, people talking to each other about what's going on isn't inherently unrealistic, which makes it an easy cover for bad writing. I can think of 2 good rules of thumb to avoid this problem. First off, if your characters are ever telling the story for you, there's a good chance it's an out-of-character exposition dump.
Last run, you were a bit reckless.
It was 2 runners and a clicker who barely had teeth. I handled it.
You want to start or what?
Payment accepted.
Like, who did she say that for? You might be surprised to hear that I'm very familiar with transactions, and I had already pieced together that the weed was being offered as payment in exchange for therapy, especially because they've been talking in depth about it this whole time. I'm pretty sure Joel isn't confused about what's going on either, being the one paying and all, which means this lady just narrates her own actions. And that's weird. Secondly, try to think of your characters as a filter for the information you're communicating, and then don't let yourself break the rules of that filter. There's a great video by a YouTuber I love called Local Script Man that goes in depth on this topic. I'll link it in the description, but I'm gonna cover it briefly here using Joel as an example. He's a very straightforward and well-executed trope, a guy you may even know in real life. He's a closed-off, goal-driven, small picture man with a heart of gold buried under decades of trauma and discomfort. He doesn't address his feelings because he's in survival mode constantly. If he paid attention to how much he hurts, he wouldn't be able to act. And action saves his life and the lives of people he loves. That's hard to shake off, and it defines everything he does. If you remember what I said about character growth in the Arcane video, these traits are only effective when they stay the same and we chip away at one thing over time. We can define Joel's filter based on these things we know about him. You have to think of dialogue as an action. It's just another choice your character makes. Everyone has things they would and wouldn't say, and ways they would frame information, assuming they would even choose to share it. We've already watched Joel communicate before, so this isn't hard. We know he's totally open to talking about practical certainties, even uncomfortable ones like death. But the second the conversation becomes about him, he turns avoidant or angry and shuts it down.
I'm not her, you know.
What?
Maria told me about Sarah.
Ellie? You are treading on some mighty thin ice here.
He obviously harbors strong feelings of guilt and regret around the loss of his daughter, and he's terrified of loving anyone enough to experience that loss again, so he keeps those feelings as far away as possible. We even see him turn down a photo of her because he can't let himself be reminded. But we also know he loves Ellie, even though he doesn't want to admit it to himself. He protects her with his life, he softens up enough to have fun with her, he listens and learns about her interests, and that closeness constantly threatens to make him vulnerable again. So this is where we get his conflict. He has two opposing ideals, and he's forced to choose between the practical self-preservation of leaving Ellie behind or the vulnerability of admitting to himself that she's now the thing that matters most by shooting up a hospital. This is a great example of how long it should take to make even a tiny amount of progress. Joel's decision is huge and carries enormous consequences, yet he still doesn't become a different person afterwards. He lies to Ellie immediately about what happened and only tells his brother at the beginning of the next game. He's not suddenly an open book, but we see that he's making progress through little changes, things he'd never have done before, like singing Ellie a song or keeping that photo of his daughter in his bedroom. It's even conceivable that he could eventually open up and deal with his feelings, and that's why it's so tragic for that moment to be cut short. It's the feeling of wasted potential. If Joel is openly admitting to his flaws and mistakes, using therapy language, seeking help, that's a different person, or at least a much different version of Joel than the one we're used to. Not one who couldn't exist, but someone in a very different mindset than he was at the same point in the games, and that would impact events differently. This Joel might have talked to Ellie by now. He might not have handled his lies so poorly in the first place. The guy who says,
I can't hold myself responsible for another person's emotional state,
isn't usually the same guy who awkwardly attacks the homophobe at the town function because he only knows how to love through violence. That guy is not present in these episodes, until he is, because that scene happens. Pedro Pascal is here, but he's not giving Joel most of the time because the only thing we see him do is accurately explain his current relationship dynamic with Ellie to everyone who asks, which might be the last thing Joel Miller would ever do. And I'm talking about very immediate character traits here, like who is right in front of us right now? What are we working with for this scene? Obviously the same man could easily do contradictory things at different points in his life, even on the same day, but this isn't life. It's a story. It's cleaned up and cherry-picked to make a point. I was considering writing up a sample scene to show what it might sound like if Joel's dialogue about this topic was written more in character, and then I remembered that we already have that.
Making a vaccine would have killed you, so I stopped them.
That's it. That's how we do it. In these two episodes, they're making a really big deal about Joel needing to come clean about his lie, which is like the one thing he won't say, even though he's completely self-aware about all of his other flaws. But in the games, he's already told Ellie by this point. That's why they're not talking. So I don't know where they're going with that. By the way, the surest sign that you have no idea how to tell an audience who your character is without just explaining it at them might be including a therapy scene. Pro tip, don't use therapy scenes to explain your character's issues or make them realize something about themselves. It's lazy writing, it's not fun to watch, and nobody can write therapists well for some reason. The only way your character should ever be in therapy is if the therapy isn't the point of the scene. I don't know, if they're in a session and somebody smashes through a wall and starts a fight.
I looked at my uncle and...
let me guess. He died?
Or something else. I don't know. Just define your characters through choices and their own words, not what other characters say about them. To be a little more sympathetic for a minute, the reason writers fall back on these crutches is because, honestly, it's hard. It's cool that we can define characters so effectively with even the tiniest differences in their communication, but it also means that very slight variation in the context of a scene could have a much bigger impact than we intended. We can actually compare two nearly identical scenes between the game and the show to see how the smallest change in dialogue affects how a character comes across. There's the part where Maria takes Ellie to see Seth, that old guy who called her the slur before, and he gives them sandwiches as an implied peace offering. Ellie is reasonably uninterested in hearing what he has to say, and in both versions she's dismissive and unresponsive and won't even take the food from him. In the game, she's really matching his energy. He says that he had too much to drink the night before, gives her the sandwiches, and while he technically says sorry, he says it kind of aggressively. In the show, the scene is nearly identical, except they add one additional exchange.
It happens to everyone. People get drunk and say awful shit they've never thought before. Ellie.
No, that's fair. I shouldn't have said it. I shouldn't have even thought it.
That version is both more aggressive on Ellie's part and a more genuine apology from Seth than in the game version, but then the rest of the scene plays out the same way. The character implications of Ellie's reaction are then different depending on the version of the apology she's reacting to. In the game, Seth sets the tone and Ellie follows. In the show, she deliberately denies the tone he tries to set. It's not morally right or wrong either way, just different, and implies different things about the character, specifically how forgiving she is. We call this a Han shot first situation. If you're a new writer and you're worried about misrepresenting your characters through their dialogue choices, I totally get it. And I encourage you to do it this way anyway, because even if the characters don't come across exactly how you meant them to, they'll still at least feel more like real people than if you have them explain their feelings out loud. It's also a skill that gets easier with practice, and in the meantime, you might accidentally stumble on interesting character dynamics that you never would have thought of otherwise. The important things to remember are that the dialogue you write should be a choice by and about the character, and that while exposition isn't a crime, you can trust audiences to pick up the details of your story more than you'd expect, as long as you understand them yourself. If you're an experienced professional working on an established franchise on a popular streaming platform, step it the fuck up. The Last of Us Season 2 unfortunately seems to be following the lead of a lot of recent television writing by eliminating all possibility of misinterpretation at the expense of character nuance, or they're just using AI. I honestly can't tell for sure. I'm curious to see where the rest of the season goes. I can't say my hopes have been set especially high, but I like watching most of these actors. I'm also curious to see if they manage to improve on any of the weaker parts from the game, and I really want to see the Rat King part. We all know it's coming, and probably not all the dialogue will be terrible. It honestly already gets better by the end of the second episode, kind of. They add a bunch of stuff to Abby's speech that isn't great. But at one point, Dina lies about something we watched her do.
And you saw this?
Mm-hmm. It was exactly like Ellie says.
And she doesn't even wink at the camera.
Dina was lying. She didn't say anything.
Okay, can you just work with me here a little bit? Anyway, that's all I got for now. Thank you for watching. I plan to do my first video on writing women next time, and I will probably make another video or two to complete my thoughts on the Last of Us franchise over the course of the next couple of months. If you have any more suggestions, please leave them in the comments and I'll add them to my ever-growing list. I'm trying to include an ad at the end of each of these videos, but because I hate doing ad reads for products I don't care about, and also, I guess, having money, I'm trying to source them from you, the creative people who watch these videos. If you have a YouTube channel or a Kickstarter page or a cause you care about, or maybe just a friend you really want to embarrass with lots of public attention, shoot me an email and I'll work with you to figure out a fair price. I'd really prefer to promote local artists and fans over HelloFresh for as long as I can afford to ignore them. So stick around to hear about this episode's sponsor, and I will see you next time. Ta-da! Thanks to some dubious magical items, I have not slept in days. Coincidentally, our sponsor today is Goblin Society Games. They're a small game development company and a Door Monster fan. They publish supplementary content for D&D and other tabletop RPGs. Things like Merkrag's Compendium of Curios, which contains 300 illustrated original items for D&D 5th edition. I absolutely love this thing, because my favorite thing to do as a dungeon master is just throw game-changing magical items into random chests and let my players stumble upon them and then ruin my plans. because it's fun. And this book is full of them. It's made with an emphasis on less frequently used equipment like sickles, clubs, torches, ammunition, arcane focuses. Also prioritizes special abilities over like raw damage, things that add new mechanics and let you do new things. My personal favorite is the chronoscope, which is a spyglass that lets you see up to 1,000 years into the past of whatever landscape you're looking at. I don't know what you would use that for, but I know one of my players would come up with some insane way to subvert everything I put in their path using nothing but magical time sites. They're a really cool company, and they also have several of their own original games. And they saw last week's video where I advertised the GoFundMe for the family that needed financial support, and they've decided that along with this ad, for the next 2 weeks, 100% of the profits from Drive-Thru RPG sales, which is the system they use, will be donated directly to that GoFundMe. So if you're interested in helping out that family and also getting yourself some cool D&D add-ons, go check them out, GoblinSocietyGames.com. Thank you for watching. Thank you for donating, buying, all the things. I should go sleep.